Great Ife. Greatest Ife. Articulate Ife. Greatest Gbagba. Greatest articulate Gbogbo. What's the rest? Ah ha ha ha. Distinguished guests on the service table, ladies and gentlemen, I miss coming to University of Ife just like that. In 1977, I was given admission to read GPE, Government Philosophy Economics Combined Honors Degree at the University of Ife. But my heart desire was to study law. And then University of Lagos beat you to it. I was given an admission to read law in 1978 at the University of Lagos. So I missed Great Ife just like that. But there's no better university in the world. You fell into my trap because I've not finished my statement. There's no better university in the world than University of Lagos. But I must confess that I really fell in love with your anthem today. Whoever put it together deserves an ovation, even if it's not here. Very inspiring. Very, very inspiring anthem. My extended family had invested in Ife a great deal. My mother-in-law of blessed memory was a hall warden here at Morimi Hall for several years, Mrs. Lawie. And the man who preached the gospel the day I got born again and who baptized me on September 24, 1974, Reverend Emmanuel Alabi, was also a hall warden at the University of Ife. And while I was still courting my wife, I probably knew this campus better than many of you. So it gives me a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the executive of Angola Hall and the Students' Union for deeming me fit to be here as a guest lecturer. I stand here today in celebration of an institution whose commitment to the Nigerian ideal is etched indelibly on the pages of history. The pride of place occupied by this university in the educational landscape of our nation and continent is one reserved for a very select few. A league of universities that have earned the right to the epithet great. The import of Great Ife, as this ivory tower is fondly called, lies not in the serenity of its physical environment, nor in the sophistication of its laboratories and information technology centers. It resides not just in its towering academic records, nor in its consistency among the top-ranked universities in Nigeria. It consists not merely in the fact of its location, in a city that also plays host to Yoruba historical and cultural heritage. Nor is this university defined just by its belonging to the class of tertiary institutions dubbed first-generation universities, conceived and birthed by the founding fathers of our nation in our glory days. Rather, the import of Great Ife lies in the revolutionary spirit that birthed it and has characterized its interaction with the social, political, and economic landscapes of our nation since its inception. The revolutionary gene was infused into the DNA of this university when it was established through a stroke of political activism by the Action Group under the leadership of Chief Obafemi Awolowo in defiance of the report of the Ashby Commission, which had recommended that the University College Ibadan, a federal university, was sufficient for the Western region. Rejecting the Ashby recommendation, the leadership of the region, in its characteristic proactivity and prioritization of education as a tool for development, conceived and established this university from funds generated within the region. I'm therefore pleased to be among you as we consider this very weighty matter that pertains to the future of our nation as encapsulated in our theme, Nigeria Beyond 2015. At a time when power brokers are locking horns in partisan politicking, when vested interests across party lines are facing off ahead of the planned February elections, and when politicians are preoccupied with electioneering, sloganeering, and manifesto engineering, I consider it statemently and a demonstration of a sense of responsibility for the occupants of Angola whole and the Students' Union government of this great university to have looked beyond the euphoria of the election season to the weightier matters of nation building. Having said that, I must let you know that I come before you today with a solemn realization that Nigeria is on the verge of what we go down in history as a most crucial moment in our journey to nationhood. I speak to you with a weight of responsibility, knowing that I'm addressing a generation whose future is at stake in this pivotal moment in our nation's history. A generation that is caught up in the complex paradoxes of our nation. A generation that is outwardly confident in itself, yet lost in the frantic search for individual and national identity. Seemingly optimistic, yet disillusioned by the failed promises of his country. Despising the social, political, and economic equation of its nation, yet in possession of the latent power to determine the destiny of that nation. I speak to you of the future that is possible for our nation, Nigeria, a future that you have the power to create. What is it about 2015? At the turn of the millennium, the year 2015 was marked by the international community as a landmark year. In September 2000, world leaders met at the United Nations headquarters in New York to make projections for the community of nations. The 189 world leaders at the summit agreed on 8 developmental goals, better known as the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, with a deadline for accomplishment set for 2015. That same year in Dakar, Senegal, the international community set a 2015 target for attaining its goal of meeting the educational needs of children, youths, and adults, the Education for All goal it had set 10 years prior but failed to meet. It is necessary to point out that most of these goals were set with Africa in mind, given the relatively disadvantaged state of the continent at the turn of the millennium. While we wonder why 2015 was chosen by the international community for the attainment of its broad range of developmental objectives, I would like to take you to other pertinent projections that make 2015 crucial for our nation and indeed our continent. In December 2000, under the direction of the National Intelligence Council, NIC, of the United States of America, and with the support of a range of non-governmental institutions and experts, a Global Trends 2015 report was published with a view to highlighting the major drivers and trends that will shape the world in 2015. While noting that those drivers will include demographics, natural resources and environment, science and technology, the global economy and globalization, national and international governance, future conflict, and the role of the United States, the report had the following to say of Nigeria. Criminal organizations and networks based in North America, Western Europe, China, Colombia, Israel, Japan, Mexico, Nigeria, and Russia will expand the scale and scope of their activities. They will form loose alliances with one another, with smaller criminal entrepreneurs, and with insurgent movements for specific operations. The report continued. They will corrupt leaders of unstable, economically fragile or failing states, insinuate themselves into troubled banks and businesses, and cooperate with insurgent political movements to control substantial geographic areas. Their income will come from narcotics trafficking, alien smuggling, trafficking in women and children, smuggling toxic materials, hazardous waste, illicit arms, military technologies, and other contraband, financial fraud, and racketeering. The report also identified the possibility of Nigeria, among other states of major concern to U.S. strategic interests, failing to manage serious internal religious and ethnic divisions leading to crisis over the next 15 years, 2015 being the expiration of that 15-year projection. I hope I'm having your attention. Earlier on in November 1997, at a time when Nigeria's leadership role in the West African sub-region was strongly felt through the instrumentality of the Economic Community of West African States Monitoring Group, ECOMOG, the NIC predicted the following in a publication titled Global Trends 2010. Nigeria and Kenya will not have the potential to play the role of leaders in their respective regions. Nigeria's economic mismanagement, corruption, and political instability will not be resolved over the next 15 years. In December 2004, the National Intelligence Council, again based on consultations with non-governmental experts around the world, released a publication titled Mapping the Global Future, report of the National Intelligence Council's 2020 project. While projecting economic ascendancy and influence for China, India, and other Asian countries, the report said little about sub-Saharan Africa and seemed to relegate the future of Nigeria and other sub-Saharan African countries to negative phenomena including HIV/AIDS, organized crime, and brain drain by the year 2010. Subsequently, in January 2005, the NIC convened a group of 10 top U.S. experts on sub-Saharan Africa to determine how the 2020 projections will reflect in sub-Saharan African countries by 2015. This led to a March 2005 report titled Mapping Sub-Saharan Africa's Future, a futuristic view on the subcontinent that not only showed little optimism on the prospects of sub-Saharan Africa enjoying the projected global economic gains, but also painted a gloomy and chaotic picture for the continent. In what was referred to as downside scenarios, the following possibility was projected for Nigeria by 2015. That's why your theme is very, very important for this moment. This was a projection. Other potential development might accelerate decline in Africa and reduce even our limited optimism. The most important will be outright collapse of Nigeria. Why currently Nigeria's leaders are locked in a bad marriage that all dislike, but dare not leave, there are possibilities that could disrupt the precarious equilibrium in Abuja. The most important will be a junior officer coup that could destabilize the country to the extent that open warfare breaks out in many places in a sustained manner. If Nigeria were to become a failed state, it could drag down a large part of the West African region. Even state failure in small countries such as Liberia has the effect of destabilizing entire neighborhoods. So if millions were to flee a collapsed Nigeria, the surrounding countries up to and including Ghana will be destabilized. Further, a failed Nigeria probably could not be reconstituted for many years, if ever, and not without massive international assistance. This downside scenario is what is often quoted as a projection by the United States that Nigeria will break up by 2015. Though the United States government has sought to distance itself from this report, it is noteworthy that the National Intelligence Council, the body behind this projection, supports and reports to the Director of National Intelligence, who is officially the principal advisor to the President of the United States, the National Security Council, and the Homeland Security Council on intelligence matters. A disclaimer to this report by the then United States Ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Terence Macaulay, therefore seems like a typical case of plausible deniability, a strategy officially adopted by the Central Intelligence Agency CIA since the 1960s in the days of Harry Truman, in which security documents involving controversial actions are managed in such a way that if they become exposed to the public, the president is adequately shielded. In the year 2005, while I was unaware that such sessions had been convened by the American intelligence community, I was taken in a vision to the war room at the White House, where I saw President George Bush plotting against Nigeria. I confronted him in the vision and asked him to leave Nigeria alone, but he simply told me to help myself to some American breakfast. I released that video when the Americans were here taunting us over the the Chibok girl situation. And they were here interviewing our ministers and ridiculing them. I brought the video out for the first time because I preached it live back then in 2005. And I brought it back to life. The American embassy responded to it, that they were not here to destabilize our nation. I alerted the nation that if America, as powerful as it claims to be, could not detect the boys from Osama bin Laden direct the Twin Towers in what is now known as 9/11, they should leave us alone. If they can't help us, God will sort us out. As the Yoruba people say, Oshabo legbami, fimi lebo tibami. Young leaders of this nation, I'm bringing this information to you to let you understand the global environment within which your country exists, and to let you realize that long before this time, the year 2015 had been identified by the international community as a crucial year for Nigeria, and by implication, the rest of Africa. I'm doing this to challenge you to become responsible for your nation and the continent. You will observe from these reports that governments and institutions of other nations are taking the time to strategize about your nation and by implication, your future. I want you to become righteously indignant, not towards those nations, but towards your government for failing to take responsibility for the fate of your nation. I want you to begin to ask what the Department of State Services, DSS, and the Directorate of Military Intelligence, DMI, are doing in terms of mapping the future of our nation and its strategic interests. I also want to let you know that the world does not expect much from you, your country or your continent, even though it reluctantly admits that you have great potential and indeed fears what you could become if your country were to get the fundamentals right. I'm here to challenge you to rise up and take your destiny in your hands. I'm here to inspire you to reject the stereotypic limitations that the world identifies you with, to summon your full potential towards making your country and your continent the best that they can and must be. I do this because I'm persuaded that there is hope for our nation and continent, despite the gloomy picture painted by the world, and regardless of the fact that they have been written off by a cynical, skeptical, and pessimistic international intelligentsia. In spite of the mess brought upon the nation by an unpatriotic, self-seeking political class over the years, I'm confident there is a future for our country and continent, because a people that once sat in darkness shall see a great light. At this point, it is necessary to point out the intrinsic factors that make the year 2015 crucial for Nigeria, and I might have informed some of these projections by the international intelligence community. I would like to ask again, please, at this juncture, lend me your ears. Factors that make 2015 a crucial year for Nigeria. First, 2015 marks Nigeria's first post-centenary year since the amalgamation of the northern and southern protectorates in 1914, which became the precursor to the formation of the Nigerian state. There have been allegations that colonial action was intended to be a 100-year experiment purportedly designed within the framework of a secret document called the Tinubu Square Edict or the Accord of 1914. Although the propagators of this so-called agreement do not specify the parties involved, it is claimed that it was signed by Lord Lugard. While the logical reaction would be to dismiss such insinuations on the legal ground that British colonies were created by an order in council and not by treaties, it is instructive that former head of state General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, IBB, at the January 31st, 2013 launch of 2 books in honor of Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who had served as Minister for Foreign Affairs during IBB's tenure as military president, stated that even Lord Lugard gave Nigeria a lifespan of 100 years. Coming from a former head of state who had access to relevant intelligence, such statements should not be taken lightly. It buttresses the fact that the colonial administration regarded the act of amalgamation not as an integration of peoples, but as an administrative arrangement for the economic interests of the British Empire. It also suggests that the colonialists, at the point of amalgamation, has no definite plan to transition the colonies from dependent territories to independent states, but had hoped that within 100 years, the resources of these territories would have been exhaustively exploited under a colonial arrangement for the benefit of the British Crown, after which the colonial peoples will be left alone to decide their fate under a new international order that will keep them in perpetual subjugation. However, subsequent events, particularly the Second World War, would destabilize the existing international order, weaken the colonial empires, including Britain. It also facilitated the coming of the United States of America into the community of nations and its ascendance to global power status, as well as the rise of the Soviet Union and the threat of communism. With Britain relinquishing its power, its world power status to the United States, and the world subsequently becoming bipolar, pressure from the new world powers, in addition to agitations within the colonies, forced Britain and the other European colonialists to gradually concede independence to the colonies. Nevertheless, in the post-colonial international order, Africa has been merely nominally politically independent and has remained largely economically dependent on the West in what scholars have termed neo-colonialism. The international legal order, from the structure, composition, and power dynamics of the United Nations to the various international trade regimes, has been largely disadvantageous to Africa. The multinational corporations, with the connivance of the corrupt and self-serving political administrations of Africa, have simply continued the pre-independence order that was characterized by the exploitation of African territories with the collusion of local chiefs. Therefore, whereas Nigerians are treating the 2015 projections with levity, it appears that the international community is already acting in anticipation of the downward scenario, which is indeed a nightmare scenario. As one analyst puts it, it appears the international community is walking to the 2015 answer. If these projections are considered against the backdrop of the Lugurdian timetable for the exhaustive exploitation of Nigerian territory and the subsequent expiration of the so-called amalgamation experiment, it will appear that the Western powers have not jettisoned that timetable. To buttress this point, observers have pointed out the following developments. 1. The 2011 insurgency in northern Nigeria has escalated to international proportions from what started as a small religious sect. The escalation of the sect's activities to the level of insurgency just a few years before 2015 in such a proportion never before experienced in Nigeria's history of religious conflict is worth pondering upon. There have been reports alleging that the escalation is part of an international plot to balkanize Nigeria. One of such is an article by Gordon Dove, reportedly a national security specialist and an editor for Veterans Today, a U.S. magazine. Dove's article has been referenced in other Nigerian dailies, including Daily Trust and Vanguard. In his allegations, which were made a couple of years before the crisis of Boko Haram reached its current alarming state, Gordon Dove described Boko Haram as a construct of outside powers who plan to balkanize Nigeria. Although the veracity of Dove's claims may be challenged, reports from other sources, such as News Rescue, have linked the activities of the sect to foreign powers operating through Middle Eastern proxies in such a way that even the perpetrators do not realize who is driving the wheel. Some analysts are of the opinion that this was a characteristic manner in which Al-Qaeda was created in Afghanistan, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas in Palestine. It's also interesting to know that 15 years after the Global Trends 2015 report, the Boko Haram insurgency has been linked with narcotics trade and trafficking in women and children, among other criminal activities projected in the report. Number 2, a couple of years before 2015, major Western multinationals, especially in the oil and gas sector, began to divest from Nigeria as though in anticipation of an unconducive environment for business. It is noteworthy that a top-ranking official of a multinational oil company with a major stake in the Nigerian petroleum industry was named among the experts that produced a report titled Mapping the Global Future, the subsequent review of which led to the projection of the 2015 failed state scenario for Nigeria. I'm going to leave a bibliography behind for you so that you can see the source of this research. And I want you to please do due diligence, because it's your future. You must be concerned and you must rise up to know how to defend the integrity of your nation and how to take the destiny of this nation to your hands. Number 3, between 2006 and 2008, after the NIC projections, the United States established its United States African Command called AFRICOM with the aim of protecting U.S. interests across Africa. When Nigeria opposed the creation of AFRICOM and asked instead for U.S. assistance in the creation of a Nigerian-owned and controlled military base in the various sub-regions of the continent, it was projected by intellectuals that relations between Nigeria and the U.S. would turn sour, and that in its characteristic manner, the U.S. would begin subtly interfering with Nigeria's internal affairs in a bid to ultimately force Nigeria to comply. Number 4, a 5-day war game was simulated in Pennsylvania, USA in May 2008, as reported by the African Security Research Project. Tests were conducted to determine how AFRICOM could respond to a possible crisis in Nigeria projected at 2013, in which the Nigerian government is near collapse, and rival factions and rebels are fighting for control of the oil fields of the Niger Delta and vying for power in the oil-rich country, which was at that time the 6th largest supplier of America's oil imports. The report further indicates that at the end of the war game, the participants drew up a set of recommendations for the then Army Chief of Staff, General George Casey, to present to President Bush, and that General Casey decided to brief presidential candidates at the time, John McCain and Barack Obama, on the results of the exercise. It is instructive that one of the major catalysts fueling political rivalries ahead of the February 2015 elections is the existence of 92 oil wells in the Niger Delta, the allocation of which will be determined by whoever wins these elections. Number 5, in April 2014, following the abduction of the Chibok girls and the ensuing international outcry, the Boko Haram crisis eventually opened the door for AFRICOM's entry into Nigeria. Number 6, in 2014, America completely cut off imports from Nigeria. Although it was presented as a policy aimed at stopping U.S. dependence on foreign oil and promoting clean energy, a December 2014 report by The Guardian suggests that America's imports from other traditional oil suppliers, including OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, actually increased when the U.S. halted imports from Nigeria. This suggests that the policy on Nigeria could have been a targeted measure. Number 7, the Nigeria-U.S. relationship has remained sour in the lingering war against Boko Haram, with Nigeria calling off the training arrangement it had with U.S. soldiers. Furthermore, the U.S. has refused to sell weapons to Nigeria, citing human rights abuses by the Nigerian forces. It's however noteworthy that the same U.S. has a history of support for undemocratic partners, as was the case with Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, who America supported with $300 million worth of military aid, despite its implication in allegations of human rights abuse. These developments will make the observer wonder if the world is getting set for the downside scenario for Nigeria in 2015. Am I boring you? The second intrinsic factor that makes 2015 crucial for Nigeria is the February 2015 elections, which seem to further provide the incubator for the arching of the dreaded scenario. Speaking on the theme, the gathering storm, an avoidable shipwreck, how to avoid catastrophic Euroclydon, in a State of the Nation broadcast at the Lateran Assembly, on Sunday the 4th of January this year, alerted the nation on 7 signs that point to the looming storms ahead of the forthcoming elections. These signs include poor level of election preparedness, number 1. 2, safety and security risks. 3, likely minority kingmaking. 4, looming constitutional and legal crisis. 5, impending post-election tension. 6, looming economic collapse. And 7, potential religious confusion, betrayals, scandals, and persecution. If I pause here to give you an analysis of what is going to be the likely scenario for this 2014 election, please don't take it that I'm trying to frighten you. I'm just preparing you so that you don't take sides against Nigeria, but you take side of Nigeria. May I ask you, who will win the 2014 election? Let me hear you loud and clear. Say it loud. Thank you very much. Hold on. Why Buhari? Change. You are intelligent people. What change? I can't hear you. I cannot hear you. Thank you very much. Now let me ask you fundamental questions based on that, because I want you to think. I want you to think. I said it in that broadcast on the 4th and the 11th January that my loyalty is to Buhari, so I share your sentiments. But listen to these scenarios. Number 1, and I'm off my speech now, I'm going back to the speech. Number 1, if Buhari wins that election, what is going to happen to Nigeria? And what will be the response of the South-South militants? Can you please take note of the question? I'm not generating any response from you yet. Just ponder. Number 2, if in spite of your projections and enthusiasm, Jonathan wins that election, I know you say God forbid, what is going to happen to Nigeria? And what will be the response of the North that has been out of power equation for a very long time since Yar'Adua died, and since Obasanjo just 8 years? Let me go further. What is it that determines electoral victory? Campaign, billboards, postals. What is it that determines electoral victory? You will say people's vote. Is that not so? Who and who influences how you vote? Your personal decision, what your friends say, or entrenched power blocks? Anywhere in the world, including biblical history, entrenched power blocks influence the outcome or electoral victory more than anything. There are 6 or 7 power blocks entrenched in Nigeria, and you begin to think who supports who. Number 1 power block, the incumbent president and former heads of state. You can call them the council of state. From the council of state, we have 2 candidates, 1 former head of state and 1 incumbent president. There are 6 others, namely Gawan, Shagari, Obasanjo, IBB, Shoneko, and Abdusalam Abubakar. I want you to position these 6. On whose side are they? Because they are a power block. Just listen to me. I'm giving you analysis because we don't think, and we just jump and go to the streets. We don't think, we don't make preparation. In peace, we don't prepare for war. And we get blown away, we get shattered because our expectations are not met. My training as a lawyer prepares me to expect the best and prepare for the worst. That's number 1 power block, entrenched power block. Number 2 power block, traditional rulers. You can say without any iota of doubt, because he had spoken loudly and clear, that a person like Awujale of Ijebu and Obasikiru Adetono is behind Buhari. Where is Oni of Ife? Where is Alaafin of Oyo? Where is Oshemawi of Ondo? Where is Owiade Ekiti? You can say all you like. I know better than you do because I'm an insider. Where are the emirs? Where is the Sultan of Sokoto? Where are they? They are a power block. Let's leave them. Let's come to retired generals who have tasted power. The likes of Danjuma, Jerry Husseini, Donkat Bali. You can list them. Where are they? Who are they backing up? They are a power block influencing what will happen in our nation. And we will take to the streets and go die. Instead of thinking and saying, wait a minute. Where is the power block that will deliver what we are expecting? Let's leave them. Let's come to the governors. They are a power block. There are 36 governors in Nigeria. 25 of them adopted President Jonathan as their candidate. And President Jonathan's election will come before theirs. 11 are supporting Buhari. And if they control the delegates as well as those who man the polling booths, you have 25 against 11. Leave that sector alone. Let's come to another power block. Let's consider the corporate boys, the men of commerce, who are the one bankrolling all this also. Sometimes when the politicians don't put their hands into the till. Where is Dangote? Where is Otedola? Let me continue, please. I'm not looking for an applause. I want you to think, because we don't. Where is Tony Elumelu? Where is the owner of Zenith? I forgot his name momentarily. Jim Ovia. Where is about Tudeko? I can list their names for you. Let's leave them. Look at those who control masses of people on Sundays and Fridays. Tell me who is Pastor Adeboye backing. Tell me who is Oyedepo backing. Tell me who is Orishaja for backing. Who are they backing? Because they influence people to go vote. You are here shouting, Nigeria say Buhari, but those who are plotting behind the scheme, they are doing what they are doing, and when the result comes, we say they have cheated us. Now hear this. The only power block that can set the nation free is the people power block. The people power block. They are the people who can say we are taking our destiny into our hands. But I saw it in the Bible when they said to your tent, O Israel, we have no portion in the house of Jesse. And the kingdom was split into two. But who did they end up with? Jeroboam, that compounded their problem. I say it publicly, I lied not in the Holy Ghost. My PVC this time around is for Nigeria, first and foremost. If we can't put these things properly in order, we'll be running ourselves into a major storm that can consume us. I'm not a politician, I'm a nation builder. I say so to all who care to listen, whether as running mate or as not running at all. My interest is to see a nation that works in my lifetime. My total educational career. And one of my friends is here, Professor Lushile, is there seated. I carried my camp bed to be sleeping in their rooms and the College of Medicine. They voted for me and they supported me as I was running election for the Students' Union, the presidency of University of Lagos in 1978. We were the people who brought Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Benga Daniel and I. For the first time, we created what we called the UPN Youth Wing and brought Chief Obafemi Awolowo to University of Lagos in 78 before the ban was lifted in 79. We wanted to see the phenomenon that swept through Western region to engulf our nation. But one of those power blocks said, the best candidate might not win. And they're still there protecting their own interests till tomorrow. Don't be deceived by what they say in paper, they mean behind the scenes, or what was President Obasanjo doing, shaking the hand of the president and bowing to him. Shall I continue? I'm here to enlighten you. I'm not here to confuse. I want you to think deep. And let us rise and know how to rescue Nigeria from the jaws of destruction. In reaction to my 4th of January speech, the government and the electoral body have attempted to clarify certain issues raised and have taken certain measures aimed at boosting election preparations. However, the signs still loom. And the nation has thus far turned a deaf ear to my proposal for a horse before the cart approach. Instead, we are plunging headstrong into the storms, carrying out a volatile transition process without laying the necessary foundation for the sustenance of our democracy. In what is turning out to be the democratic paradox, it appears that we are acting out the script for the downside scenario and setting ourselves up for the fulfillment of the 2015 failed state projections. Do I hear you say, God forbid? This address is, however, not about the elections. As far as those are concerned, I've sufficiently warned the nation. Let him who has ear to hear what has been said. Instead, this speech is about the great nation that will rise out of the rubble of the old one that is going down. It's about the part of the unfolding Nigerian story which international pundits are not privy to, even though they realize the existence of a part of the Nigerian puzzle that beats linear projections and confirms prognosis. It's about the God-ordained destiny of our nation and what we must do to get there. At this juncture, it is necessary to find out what is it about Nigeria that has warranted such attention from the international pundits in the first place. The first thing I want to talk about is the Nigerian potential. Please listen to me. In his report titled Mapping Sub-Saharan Africa's Future, the NIC publication I earlier referred to, it was noted that the ability of African countries to continue to muddle along despite high levels of violence should not be underestimated. Let me pause there and tell you what that means. Nigeria has a way of throwing up what is called anticlimax. I've watched it over and over. I may be slightly older than you are, but you have been around enough for yourself to know. Have you noticed that the freest and the fairest election in Nigeria was the June 12, 1993 election? Before that election was conducted, I stood on the platform of Natarian Assembly and I said, thus said the Lord, SDP will fail, NRC will lose, be cut off and swallowed up, the military will fall, verdict 93, our God reigns. I got home that night, my wife cooked for me and said, GB, that's what she calls me. I said, yes. He said, I don't interfere with your work, but it appears there's a slip of tongue today. I said, slip of tongue. I said, where? He said, you said SDP will fail and NRC will lose. There are two parties. Which one will win? I said, God will win. That's what I heard. That's what I declared. We voted. Everybody was expecting result. Did they come? Anticlimax number one. Anticlimax number two. The Yorubas began to say, if anybody touches Abiola, Nigeria will break. They did not only touch him, they arrested him. They put him in detention. If Abiola dies in jail, Nigeria will break. He died, they buried him, their sons and daughters became ministers. Anticlimax number two. Are you listening? Anticlimax number three. Everybody is saying now, if the election, if Jonathan wins the election, the north will erupt. If Buhari wins the election, the south will erupt. Nigeria has a way of throwing up anticlimax. Everything will just go shem. And everyone will run into a show. And there will be no violence anywhere. And you begin to wonder, but where the crisis is, where the what I call the Euroclydon, where is waiting for us is if Buhari wins the election, what's going to happen between March and May is too long a time. It's too long a time. What's going to happen? let me stay within the boundary of this lecture. The capacity of Nigeria to defy expectations was admitted in the report, where they noted that if Angola, Nigeria, and Sudan, three of Africa's largest and most important countries, actually began to use their revenues from oil in productive ways, these states will become stronger, tens of millions of Africans will benefit from reduced poverty, and the impact on the region might be significant. The Global Trends 2015 report had earlier projected that South Africa and Nigeria, the continent's largest economies, will remain the dominant powers in the region through 2015, and that the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the SADC, Southern African Development Community, will be the primary economic and political instruments through which the continental powers, Nigeria and South Africa, exert their leadership. In April 2014, Moody's, an international rating agency, projected that Nigeria will have one of the 15 largest economies in the world by 2050. A similar projection has been made by Jim O'Neill, former chairman of Goldman Sachs, as reported in the Business Day newspaper of March 21, 2014. O'Neill had said that whereas the BRICS nations, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will be the next phenomenon after G7 economies. The mint nations, they have just cut that out as they were looking at emerging markets. The mint nations, MINT nations, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey will emerge after them. PricewaterhouseCoopers, in its projections published in 2013, saw Nigeria as the 13th largest economy in the world by 2050. It regarded Vietnam and Nigeria as potential fast-growing wildcards outside of the G20. In his growth projections, he had this to say about Nigeria. Nigeria could be the fastest growing country in our sample due to its youthful, that's you, and growing working population. But this does rely on using its oil wealth to develop a broader-based economy with better infrastructure and institutions, e.g. as regards rule of law and political governance, and hence support long-term productivity growth. The potential is there, but it remains to be realized in practice. Furthermore, using the National Power Index, the Atlantic Council, and International Futures have predicted that Nigeria will be the 19th most powerful country in the world by 2020, the 18th by 2030, 16th by 2040, and 14th by 2050. Also noteworthy is an October 2013 study by the French Institute of Demographic Studies, which predicted that by 2050, Nigeria will overtake the United States as the third most populous country in the world, with a population of 444 million behind China and India. Although we do not have to base our confidence as a nation on these international projections, it is worth pointing out that even among international pundits, our potential for greatness has been widely acknowledged. What are the factors behind the Nigerian potential? I want to tell you a few of them. Number one, population/demographics. Not only is Nigeria the most populous country in Africa, it has a very youthful population, whereas only 16% of the population in Europe and 25% of the Asian population are below 15 years. 41% of African populations is below 15 years. The population of Nigeria below 15 was 44% in 2010, while over 60% of Nigerians are below 35 years. This implies that Nigeria has a large potential workforce compared to some of the world's developed countries. I must add that this potential workforce includes you, students of this great university. Number two, factor behind Nigerian potential, natural resources. Apart from our oil reserves and natural gas reserves, Nigeria is endowed with 34 solid minerals. The last National Conference 2014 exposed that to me when we received documents showing 34 different minerals, and each state of the Federation is endowed with one or more minerals with significant trade and industrial potential. The bitumen in Ondo State alone can tar the whole of Africa, and it has not been tapped at all. Is God waiting for your generation? Investment attraction. Number 3. In 2014, a United States-based economic advisory firm, Frontier Strategy Group, identified Nigeria as the preferred investment destination among other African countries despite the security situation. This phenomenon, which is not unconnected to the nation's vast endowment, implies a great potential for capital inflow. Number 4, the Nigerian spirit. Although there is currently no index to lend empirical credence to what may be referred to as the Nigerian spirit, this inexplicable factor makes the Nigerian unique and contributes to the Nigerian potential. It is seen in the enthusiasm, the drive, and optimism of the Nigeria. It can be observed on the streets in Lagos, in the sonorous voice of the conductor calling out for potential passengers. Have you seen our conductors? That they take pride in their job. Monsieur Losha, Monsieur. He'll be shouting at the top of his voice as if he's a lecturer lecturing in Oduduwa Hall. It can be seen in the aggressiveness and tact of the street traders and even street beggars. I live in the GRA in Lagos. The street beggars have developed a new strategy. They come with bills in their hand. My wife is about to deliver. This is the bill given to me by the doctor. And they say I must pay now. It's only 3,000. I have 500 out of it. Please balance the rest for me. Don't let my wife die. They've caught me twice before I knew it was a ploy. Very aggressive, very creative. It can be seen in those who sell their products, in the doggedness of the worker racing and rushing to catch a bus early in the morning. It is resident in every Nigerian, even in a villager who visits the city for the first time and is initially taken aback by the rush, but eventually adjusts and becomes streetwise in no time. It is a latent entrepreneurial spirit waiting to be harnessed. But the Nigerian paradox, despite these endowments, our nation has paradoxically performed suboptimally. This suboptimal state of the nation is reflected in the experience of the disillusioned average Nigerian youth, whose story we shall begin to tell from his struggles through secondary school. We shall call his name Johnny. But before I talk about Johnny, let me talk about myself. I left primary school in 1966, having started in 61. By the time I got to secondary school, because there was no money, my classmates were in Form 4. I was taken to number 20 Jebel Street, East Ebutemeta, Golden Furniture, to learn carpentry. I ran from carpentry shop because the boss used saw to beat one of the apprentices and blood came out. I ran back home to start doing all kinds of work because before we could save money, my mother and I, to go into secondary school. I lost those years, but I gained them back. So listen to the story of Johnny. The substandard state of his learning environment is seen in the broken chairs, tables, and leaky roof with which his classroom is furnished. Ventilation has been taken care of by the fact that the windows are always open. In fact, there are no windows, just spaces on the walls where windows ought to be fixed. Spaces that have been further widened by cracks on the walls. Indeed, the classroom has no need of windows, as it is occupied by 3 arms, each supplying no fewer than 60 students. So altogether, there are about 180 students sharing one classroom. Johnny and his classmates dare not complain. After all, their lot is better than that of students in neighboring school, where students sit on mats and where some classes are held under a mango tree. His maths teacher, overburdened with a merciless workload for which he was last paid 6 months ago, has become the meanest man on earth, the very definition of frustration. Like his other classmates, even when Johnny does not understand his maths lessons, he dares not ask questions for fear of the teacher's hostile response. Perhaps that was why I failed mathematics. And maybe that was why in 1951, General Muhammad also failed mathematics. So birds of the same feather flock together. I eventually passed my mathematics with C5 in 1974, though. Now so I could read law. His maths teacher and other classmates, they could not ask him any question. A hungry man, they say, is an angry man. With parents who can barely feed their family, Johnny manages to get through secondary school, hawking after school to support his struggling parents. He eventually writes his works and passes all his subjects except mathematics. By hook or crook, he subsequently obtains a credit in maths from NECO and turns his attention to UTME, Universal Tertiary Matriculation Examination. He attends tutorial centers. That was what I did. We call it Igbailaro in my days. Extramural classes. I did my A-levels in 9 months. While preparing for the UTME, he takes on menial jobs to support himself and his parents. Unfortunately, he's unable to prepare sufficiently for the exams and scores below the cutoff point. He writes it a third time and decides to settle for zoology. He had wanted to read medicine. He's admitted to one of Nigeria's universities. He attends lectures in a dilapidated lecture hall that was last renovated when his grandfather was a young janitor in the university. He dissects toads in a poorly equipped laboratory that has become a biological museum. And he sleeps in an overcrowded hostel with 12 occupants in a room. That was once for 2. In my days, it was 6 in a room at University of Lagos. I don't know how many you are in your own rooms now. To worsen matters, in his final year, 2 of his results cannot be found. Fearing a carry-over and delayed graduation, he quickly joins the Christian fellowship and takes it to the Lord in prayer. He became born again by fire by force. His prayers are answered and his results are found. He graduates after 7 years on a 4-year course. Mind you, he spent 3 additional years, not because he failed, but because ASU was on strike for a cumulative period of 1.5 years, while the school was closed over student unrest for another cumulative period of 1.5 years. Okay. Upon graduation, he's posted to a remote village for an experience that assures him of one fact. Now, your suffering commences. NYSC. He gladly accepts it for 2 reasons. First, he was not posted to the north, where he cannot be certain of returning to his poor parents alive. Second, his NYSC allowance will sustain him for the period of service. He can also send a few naira notes back home to his parents. Alas, the 1-year service comes to an end and he has to look for a job. For 2 years, he drops his CV at the reception of every available firm and writes aptitude tests in every sector that has an opening, from banking and finance to telecoms, from media to oil and gas, from civil service to non-profit, and from police force to the immigration service, whose aptitude tests are conducted in football stadiums. When this don't work out, he tries out a career in comedy, but quits when MC jobs are not forthcoming, as no one wants to hire Johnny Just Come. At that point, he gives up, resigns himself to fate, makes watching football his pastime whenever there was light, becomes an expert at football analysis, and even tries out gambling in the name of sports betting. His psychological distance from his country is seen in the fact that he knows all the players in Chelsea, in Arsenal, and Manchester United, when they were bought, how much they are paid, how long their contracts will last, and how many goals they have scored, but knows nothing about a single player in a Himba or any Nigerian club for that matter. Am I talking to you? Then one day, unexpectedly, one of the banks that interviewed him a year earlier suddenly needs cashiers and gives him a call. He exactly takes the job. 1 year into the job, however, while he's trying to consider career development prospects, and I started thinking of proposing to his girlfriend. Have you seen that people don't propose easily these days? Have you noticed that? They come now old, 32, 34. I don't want to mention names before they propose to anyone. I will tell you why. While trying to propose to his girlfriend, financial crisis, he's the banking sector, and his bank downsizes. Guess who is among the first to be laid off? Johnny. We may laugh at Johnny's experience, but it's not funny. It's not funny to that young graduate on the streets of Lagos, Ife, Ibadan, Benin, Port Harcourt, or Kano, with a knotted tie under the heat of the sun, file in hand, and sweat in the brow, carrying his CV from one place to another. It is not funny to that family whose child sits at home, jobless, years after graduating, despite the time, energy, and resources spent on educating him or her. It is not funny to a nation when only 29% of its school leavers gain admission into the available tertiary institutions, which implies that 71% are shut out of the system each year. It's not funny to a nation when 50% or about 64 million of its youth population is unemployed. In the Global Talent Index, an index of how countries attract, develop, and retain talent, as well as how this translates to competitiveness, Nigeria has remained at the bottom of the table in spite of our rapid population growth. Conversely, South Africa, the other African country studied in the survey, is higher up on the table as a result of that country's relatively high spending on education as a proportion of GDP. This trend is also seen in the Global Innovation Index, which rates countries in terms of their successes at creating enabling environments for innovation and innovation outputs. In this ranking, Nigeria is number 110 out of 143 countries studied. In the Human Development Index, which is a composite statistic of life expectancy, education, and income indices, Nigeria occupies 152nd position out of 187 countries. This should not come as a surprise, as Nigeria's scorecard in the Education Index is 145 out of 181 countries. It's obvious that Nigeria has paid little attention over the years to the most vital resource in any nation, the human resource. This accounts for the paradoxical suboptimal state of the nation in spite of our material resource endowment. The underlying causes of the paradox. It was John F. Kennedy who said, "Our progress as a nation can be no swifter than our progress in education." The human mind is our fundamental resource. Every nation that must convert its material resource endowment to real wealth must prioritize human resource development. It was in consonance with that principle that Aristotle once said, "All who have meditated on the art of governing mankind have been convinced that the fate of empires depends on the education of youth." It takes genuine transformational leadership to recognize this principle and consequently to develop and deploy the right human resource for national development. Such transformational leadership was what Chief Obafemi Awolowo demonstrated in the Western region. This university, later named after him, is one of the fruits of that exceptional leadership. That kind of leadership was what Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe demonstrated in the Eastern region. The University of Nigeria, Nsukka, is one of the fruits of that dogged leadership. That kind of leadership was what Sir Ahmadu Bello demonstrated in the Northern region. Ahmadu Bello University is one of the fruits of that achieved leadership. Let some opportunists begin to equate the mere establishment of universities with transformational leadership. Let me point out that these universities were strategic components of broader regional development plans designed and articulated for each region under the leadership of the respective regional governments. The absence of that kind of transformational leadership is the immediate cause of our developmental paradox as a nation. The lack of transformational leadership is a result of fundamental divisions in our polity. A nation that is divided along ethnic and religious lines is bound to make erroneous political decisions. A situation where the Yoruba man will not vote for an Igbo man, and the Igbo man thinks he has nothing to gain from the government of a Hausa Fulani man is a recipe for clueless leadership, because in the end of our bigotry will exclude the best of us and ensure that the rest of us are governed by the worst of us. In essence, our developmental challenges have a deeper root cause in our failure to integrate and become one true nation of diverse peoples. This takes us to another aspect of the challenge. Are you tired of me? A nation of diverse entities and group agitations such as ours must be geopolitically structured to effectively balance the need for subgroup identity with the pull towards national integration. Genuine federalism is the ideal structural framework for such. It is instructive that our founding fathers were able to exhibit transformational leadership in a truly federal geopolitical context. They were called regions back then. This university would not be in existence today if the Western region had no powers to set it up in defiance of a federal proposition. When the decision to set it up was eventually made, the regional government funded it from the region's cocoa economy. Imagine what would have happened if the Western region had to wait for allocations from Ikoyi, the seat of the federal government at that time, before embarking on such developmental projects. If that had been the case, there would be no Obafemi Awolowo University today. Moreover, aside its intended contribution to the national workforce, the university was set up with the aim of providing for the region the needed manpower to run its peculiar economy. If that economy had been sustained over the years and had not been overrun by the unification decree and eventually replaced by the current mono-economic structure, no competent graduate of this university will leave school without the assurance of a job or an opportunity to build a thriving business. In the days of Gawan, when a graduate came out of university, a car loan was automatic waiting for him or her. Until Gawan himself said, Nigeria's problem is not money, but how to spend it. Given the competitive quest for development that characterized the regions at the time, and given the visionary drive of the respective regional leaders, the same would have applied to graduates of tertiary institutions across the country, including the northern region, which was at first comparatively disadvantaged. However, the eventual collapse of that era began when the federal government began to tamper with the federal structure by its unscrupulous interference in the days of Tafawa Balewa in the politics of Western region in the early 60s. The federal structure was eventually destroyed with the unification decree of General Agüey on May 24, 1966, when it declared on live television that from this day forward, Nigeria ceases to be a federation. The reversal of that unification decree by General Gowon was only on paper, and since that time, the destruction of Nigeria's federal structure, no leader, no matter how charismatic, has been as transformational in impact as our founding fathers. Potentially, transformational leaders in our post-Civil War democratic experience under a pseudo-federal structure have been met with sectional resistance, either at the election stage, as was the case with Chief Obafemi Awolowo in 1979 and 1983, or at the post-election stage, as was the case with Chief MK Abiola in 1993. Under the 1999 constitutional and structural arrangement, the electoral experience of General Muhammadu Buhari since 2003 has been another classic case of sectional rejection of transformational leadership. We can only hope that the formation of APC will or may change that trend this time around. This chain of limitations to the Nigerian potential has been further sustained by the non-awareness of the Nigerian people of the power they have at their disposal and of how to channel that power towards sustainable national transformation. Worse still, the enlightened component of the population, comprising of the elite and the intelligentsia, is often indifferent or given to compromise and playing to the gallery. Now to this subject matter, beyond 2015. The portrait of a properly structured and well-governed Nigeria. I wish I could begin to paint the portrait of Nigeria beyond 2015 by simply articulating a magnificent developmental blueprint. We will get to that juncture shortly. But it is imperative to first reiterate that given our current trajectory in 2015, we are heading for the nightmare scenario, a pathway that will necessitate a period of reconstruction. As Simon Kolawole wrote on the back page of the This Day newspaper last Sunday, 25th of January 2015, under the heading Buhari and the Burden of Expectations, he wrote, and I quote, "Unfortunately, the reality is that Nigeria will not change overnight. I'm no longer a reckless optimist," he said. "There are no shortcuts to solving some of our deep-seated problems. The road ahead is very rough, particularly as crude oil, the live wire of our economy, continues to tumble price-wise. Truth be told, no matter who wins the presidential election, whether it is Jonathan or Buhari, there are tough decisions ahead. Tough decisions about the oil industry, tough decisions about electricity tariffs, tough decisions about military action against Boko Haram, which may come with collateral damage, and tough decisions about downsizing the civil service. Don't let us deceive ourselves." He continued, "Buhari is more realistic than most of his supporters. In an interview with the Cable last year, he said, Nigerians have to be prepared to suffer for at least 5 straight years before we can stabilize this country security-wise and economically. In other words, there are no fertilizers to accelerate the development of Nigeria. And I do not blame Nigerians for being impatient. The only thing a hungry man wants to hear is food is ready, not food will be ready. But a more realistic expectation is that no matter who is president, we need policy consistency, commitment and funding for at least 10 solid years before we can be anywhere near South Korea or Singapore. Rome was not built in a day. No one man will change or transform Nigeria overnight. Tough truth. However, contrary to prognostications, it will be a blessing in disguise as it will afford us the opportunity to rebuild the foundations. It will be a real opportunity to rebuild the old ruins of our geopolitical structure, to raise collapsed institutions, and to implement a robust developmental blueprint, the output of which will shock the doomsday 2015 prognosticators and transcend 2050 projections. The portrait of Nigeria beyond 2015 will have the following landmark features. Let me quickly share them with you as I begin to close. Beyond 2015. Number one, reconciliation. The divisions in our polity over the years have been sustained by historical grievances. The failure of the Nigerian state to address these grievances has produced resentment, nurtured bitterness, and engendered distrust among Nigerians against one another and against the state. It's obvious to the discerning that the planned February 2015 general elections, the presidential election in particular, however it turns out, are set to aggravate those grievances. The path to reconstruction will therefore necessitate a genuine reconciliation program, the blueprint of which has been created, but the modalities of which are beyond the scope of this presentation. Number two, accurate demographics. You call it census. The reconciled people must have an accurate assessment of national and subnational population, not as a prerequisite for the receipt of federal allocation, but for implementable developmental plan. It will also aid proper constituency delineation and the creation of a standard voters register. Number three, restructuring. To keep reconciled peoples together, A governmental framework that preserves the right of subnational entities to internal self-determination must be put in place. As I stated earlier, this calls for the adoption of a truly federal structure in the geopolitical and fiscal sense of the concept in such a manner that effectively jumpstarts the development of all the federating units. Some of the features of a sustainable structure as follows. A, the devolution of governmental powers and responsibilities in such a manner that governance is brought much closer to the people. B, a strong center integrating strong and viable federating units. C, the empowerment of the federating units so that public goods can be efficiently delivered to end users. C, local governments that are democratically administered and financially autonomous, albeit as channels through which the federating units fulfill the promise of people-oriented governance. E, appropriately sized and efficient governments. F, a legislature that is small enough to minimize the cost of governance, yet representative enough to cater to both large and small subnational groups on the basis of equality and proportionality. G, an executive government that is separate enough from the legislature to guarantee separation of powers, yet close enough to the legislature to guarantee accountability as well as checks and balances. H, the institution of compulsory channels of accountability. I, equity in resource management as well as income generation and allocation. And finally, H, recognition and optimization of regional or zonal distinguishing factors towards development and for the purpose of efficient political, economic, and social interactions. Item number 4 in this Our Future, constitutionalism. The restructuring process must then bequeath to the nation a true people's constitution that will codify the aforementioned features and lay genuine claims to the phrase, we the people. Let me pause here if I'm not boring you and show you the hopelessness of 1999 Constitution. The same 1999 Constitution that no president in Nigeria must be sworn in more than twice. President Jonathan has been sworn in twice. So what's going to happen if he wins the election? You violate that Constitution. But that same Constitution now provides that every time a president is sworn in, he's entitled to a 4-year term. But he has not spent 8 years. So he has 2 years balance. How do you resolve it? That's the challenge of 2015. That's the challenge. The same Constitution provides the whole nation, the whole federation, is one constituency for the president. So election must take place every place on the same day at the same time for a president to emerge. So what's going to happen with the northeastern states? I like what the INEC chairman said publicly. He said, we are ready. Only the security services can tell us whether or not the election will continue. And then Dasuki went to London and spoke. Ajekelano, Omokuloni, Injajano of Epomo Inije, wait and see. We need a new constitution, a people's constitution. Number 5, institution building. Within constitutional parameters, the first institution to be rebuilt will be the electoral body with a view to producing an unbiased and truly independent electoral umpire like they have in Ghana now, whose head will be appointed not by the president, but through such mechanism of checks and balance as were recommended in relevant documents such as the report of National Electoral Reform Committee, NERC, and revisited in 2014 National Conference. The funding of such truly independent body will be drawn from the first line charge of the Federation account. This would then set the stage for the rebuilding and strengthening, as the case may be, of institutions of democratic governance across the different levels and arms of government. Number 6, integration. Upon the foundation of genuine reconciliation, restructuring, and constitutionalism, active steps must be taken to blur the fault lines that have divided us for long, and to weld the diverse people of this nation together so that one people will be formed out of many, and patriotic devotion to the national cause will transcend regional and ethnic nationalities and dissipate religious biases. This was one reason why I decided to run with General Muhammadu Buhari in 2011. Why? Number one agenda in our manifesto: Nigeria will be restructured along true federalism. And number two, no Nigerian will be asked to fill a form that requires state of origin. It will only be state of residence. I'm yet to see that in the party that emerged thereafter. Integration or social reforms, number 6. The path to recovery will be characterized by transformation in the education sector across the various levels in terms of improved access to quality education, innovative education management, world-class teacher training and development, as well as teacher evaluation and remuneration. Systems will be designed to constantly reform and update teaching and learning methods, curriculum, and access to cutting-edge technology, thereby astronomically improving learning outcomes. Moreover, the system will ensure the linkage of the education sector with a broader socio-economic framework as part of a new national economic order, as I will describe shortly. Reforms in the social landscape of our nation will also impact the health sector, empower women and youth, and enhance social security with a view to achieving social justice. Let me share my experience with you in this social reformation, especially in the educational sector. I lived in Okpebi for over 16 years or so before I moved to the GRA area. And my daughter returned from her studies abroad, and she came one day and said, "Dad, have you ever visited Okpebi school?" I said, "Yes, I'd supported their inter-house sports several times. I gave them money, and other times I'd gone there to vote or to just register for voting." And she said, "Let me show you." And Christian, you were there. Both of you came to me that day. "Let me show you the slides of the school." The windowless place I described was in Okpebi. They had no toilet. Their teachers had no tables. I couldn't believe what we saw. And those young people, my daughter, himself, and a few others said, "Let's accept responsibility." And the first responsibility was to begin to train the trainers. What do you think will happen if teachers failed the exam that the students are sitting for? It's a hopeless situation. Okpebi was scoring more or less 0. And so the ICR, the International Center for Reconstruction and Development, which are NGO, my daughter and a few young men sprung into action. At our own expense, we began to employ graduates who are very brilliant in mathematics and English, and they began to give tutorials and training and teaching to all these students who are hopeless. They went from 0 to 96%. They took a second school. They took a third school. They are now taking a fourth school, still at our expense, contributing our own quota to educational development. And before long, Lagos State, who did not want to see us then, is now giving us awards and saying RCRD is doing things in the educational sector. Where is the money meant for education? What happened to it? Under government of Yaradua, I read it in the papers. The money meant for education and health was spent on developing 6 lanes into Abuja. So where's the future? When you divert what should go into education, into making roads. Teachers just resumed work in Abeokuta today. They have not been paid their salaries for months. And yes, there are flyovers all around Abeokuta. I wonder what cars will go on top of them and who will need them. Only politicians will build bridges where there are no rivers. A new national economic order. The reconstruction process will eventually bequeath to the nation a thriving economy bustling with opportunities and ideas, and will also provide an enabling environment for innovation in every sector of the economy. One of the first fruits of this economic order will be the emergence of regional economic zones. In this regard, Nigeria will experience the rise of megacities across the 6 geopolitical zones, so that there will be 6 unique models of the Dubai experience. As I hinted earlier, A unique feature of these zones will be the productive triangular relationship between the ivory tower, industry, and government. Public policy will harness academic institutions for the discovery, development, and deployment of talents, ideas, knowledge, and entrepreneurs into industries in the sectors in which each zone has comparative advantage in terms of human and material resources as well as market potential. Let me interject here and pause. In Britain, they go to Cambridge, they go to Oxford to attract the best of their brains into civil service so that they could sit to formulate policies for their development 25 years ahead of time. In Nigeria, the dropouts are the ones that we bring into our civil service. What policies would they formulate? If we follow this, business clusters will be created to harness the revolutionary DNA of an institution such as the Obafemi Awolowo University for marketplace innovation. This will be done by government and the private sector jointly, funding targeted research projects in the university while creating a Silicon Valley type city around the university to cater to industries such as information and communication technology, ICT, agriculture and biotechnology, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, building, automobile, and cosmetics, as well as service industries such as finance, legal, hospitality, and entertainment. Such industrial cities will be powered through independent power projects with the potential to also provide uninterrupted power supply to surrounding towns, thereby adding the power sector to the industrial mix. In this triangular relationship, education will be rightly structured as a human resource development system within a viable microeconomic policy framework. Hence, educational experience will include sufficient industrial exposure. A higher education degree will require not just credits and dissertations, but feasible entrepreneurial ideas, as well as career or business plans, as the case may be. The result will be an explosion in invention and innovation, which will translate to startups in some cases and will be integrated into existing businesses through highly profitable business models in others. This will reduce unemployment to the barest minimum and cause the national economy to blossom. If Johnny, our zoology graduate and job seeker from an unnamed university, had gone through that system at the point of graduation, he would have had career options in an array of industries, including agriculture, biotechnology, and would have been adequately capacitated for the entrepreneurial option. Such unique models will be replicated around various institutions across the Federation. Indeed, such enterprise models will be distilled to the community level in such a way that the information revolution, the industrial revolution, and the agricultural revolution will be rolled into one revolutionary economic experience for our nation. In effect, we will not only catch up in the race to development, as though receiving multiple compensations for our past troubles, will blaze the trail by creating new vistas of economic and technological advancement. The details of these economic models are not for this occasion, but I've introduced to you what is possible with your own university in order to challenge you to rise up and demand a nation that works. A new international economic order. Nigeria's optimal economic performance will produce ripple effects in the West African sub-region, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in Africa as a whole. African countries will begin to experience the transition from poverty and underdevelopment to prosperity and sustainable development to the amazement of the world. As a result, Africa will be able to negotiate with the rest of the world from a position of strength as equal partners in mutual beneficial economic and political relationships, no longer as slaves, no longer as objects, no longer as pawns. But in this regard, Nigeria will readily provide the needed sub-regional and continental leadership. I come to the subject of leadership and I close. Leadership. At every stage of the reconstruction process, there will be the need for leadership. Leadership will be needed to steer the ship of state when the storms hit the nation, to to ensure we do not end up in a downside scenario projected by the National Intelligence Council of the United States. Throughout the reconstruction process, leadership will be required at various stages and at various levels until we build the Nigeria of our dreams. These leaders will be God-fearing, men and women, people of character, courage, competence, and capabilities. They will be uncompromising nonconformists and a radical opposition to corruption. I believe that such leadership materials are among you, and that the nation will be calling upon you in due time to contribute your quota as she embarks on her voyage of destiny. What student must do at this period of our nation's history? Now I come to you. I presume that the question on your minds at this juncture is, what shall we do at this critical point in the history of our nation to ensure that we get to the promised land? My answer is the same admonition I gave to students on the 17th of November last year, 2014, on the occasion of the International Students' Day, courtesy of Ogun State Government. In that presentation, I said, as individual and bodies of students, you must first of all self-reflect, self-evaluate, self-reconstruct, self-develop, and self-organize. Individual students must take responsibility for their lives and take personal development seriously, for one cannot contribute meaningfully to societal development without adequate personal development. It was Sir Winston Churchill who once said, "The price of greatness is responsibility." To this end, you must pursue excellence in learning. You must incline your minds to wisdom, knowledge, understanding, for these are the keys to unblocking the mind and unlocking potential. You must rid yourself of cultism and other self-destructive tendencies and take back student unionism from hoodlums and charlatans. After undergoing such rebirth, the student unions must become a shining light to the dark polity, separating themselves from the corruption and decay in the polity. They must then align themselves with nation builders, not self-seeking politicians. They must become crusaders for the restructuring and rebirth of the Nigerian nation, organizing themselves into a movement for national reconciliation and integration, and placing demand on government to implement recommendations that will cause this nation from the looming danger, including recommendations from the just concluded 2014 National Conference, in which I participated actively as a Southwest delegate, and in which students were represented, and in which all the delegates, including the students, signed a Charter for National Reconciliation and Integration. But that charter, when implemented, a new era of nationhood will dawn on Nigeria. But that charter will see to be people's quest to exist. Instead, will become a people who willingly come together to forge a more perfect union. By that charter, our nationhood shall no longer be the result of colonial amalgamation or military proclamation. Instead, it shall become the result of people's declaration. By that charter, we have the opportunity to evolve a social contract that spells out the principles under which we shall coexist, outlines our responsibilities as citizens, and highlights the irreducible minimum conditions under which we shall be governed and beneath which we shall refuse to be subjected. It's a declaration of the Nigerian dream that every Nigerian must rise to demand. Therefore, Nigerian students must understand the essence of that charter and become the spearheads of the promotion of its spirit and letter as a necessary step to national rebirth, using every available medium at their disposal. Then students must actively mobilize for free, fair, and credible elections when the structural and systemic framework for such has been created. In relation to the international political and economic order within which our nation currently exists, and which invariably shape our immediate social, economic, and political environment, I challenge you to become more aware and more responsible. I charge you not to reduce yourself to mere spectators in the global equation, tossed about aimlessly by the winds of globalization. I charge you to expose your minds to the right information and to ask questions. As intellectuals, conduct research, engage local and international communities using social media and other legal avenues available to you. If you become certain that your government is failing to protect the interests of your nation in the unfolding international order, you have a right to place a demand on that government. If I may inform you, certain reforms that you see today in the international, social, political, and economic order were made possible because of the events of 1968, a turning point year in which students around the world, from Paris to the United States, from Germany to Prague, from Italy to the United Kingdom, and from Poland to Japan, amongst other countries, began to challenge the injustice of that era, placing demands on their respective governments. Nigeria, too, has had our experience of students taking responsibility. In 1961, when Britain sought to sustain the culture of dependency in our relationship with Nigeria through the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact, the students of the University of Ibadan marched to the parliament in Lagos and put an end to it. Years later, in 1989, when the Washington Consensus, comprised of the United States Treasury Department and the Bretton Woods institutions, sold to Nigeria the idea of structural adjustments based on tight conditions that included austerity measures characterized by reduced government spending on critical social sectors such as education and health, the Nigerian student once again took to the streets to protect this sellout of the Nigerian state by the military administration of General Babangida. I therefore challenge you, Great Ife, to restore student unionism to its glory days. I charge you to bring back the days of the Segun Okewos, the days of the Segun Mayeguns, the days of the Yinka Odumakins, the days of the Joe Odumakins, patriots who bore the torch of truth in their time as students. As you take responsibility for the future of your nation, be guided by an age-long principle which has guided my involvement in activism right from my days in the University of Lagos and has remained with me even as we seek to salvage Nigeria on the platform of the Nigerian Group. That principle is summarily tagged: no revenge, no reprisals, no rage, no resentment, and no violence. I want you to say that with me. No revenge. Say it loud. No revenge. No reprisals. No rage. No resentment. And no violence. Thank you. It was very disheartening to learn that students of this university turned violently against one another on account of the recent visit of President Goodluck Jonathan to this campus. Whatever your political persuasions, you must desist from political violence. Do not waste your youth on account of politicians, no matter what political party or interest they represent. In conclusion, looking beyond 2015, keep your eyes on the great destiny that's ahead of our nation and determine not to look back, having put your hands on the plow until you have served your generation according to the will of God, with the integrity of your heart and with the skillfulness of your hands, as King David did. Marching on confidently with this assurance that no matter the storms that lie ahead, there is hope in our future. I believe firmly that Nigeria will be saved, Nigeria will be changed, and Nigeria will become great in my lifetime. Thank you. God bless you. God bless our country, Nigeria.